Welcome to Hazmat Theory. In this class, you will cover the material that will assist you in successfully passing the Hazmat exam at your local MVA or DMV. If you have questions about the material, please email us at donkelly@psychologistics.com. We will try to respond within 30 minutes to answer any questions you have about the material that you're trying to learn. If there's further explanation required, we'll schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience. Hazardous materials are products that pose a risk to health, safety, and property during transportation. The term often is shortened to hazmat, which you may see on road signs, or to HM in government regulations. Hazardous materials include explosives, various types of gas, solids, flammable and combustible liquid, and other materials. Because of the risk involved and the potential consequences, these risks impose all levels of government regulate the handling of hazardous materials. The Hazardous Materials Regulations, HMR, is found in parts 100 to 185 of the Title 49 of the Code Federal Regulations. The common reference for these regulations is 49 CFR 100-185. The hazardous materials table in the regulations contains a list of these items. However, this list is not all-inclusive. Whether or not a material is considered hazardous is based on its characteristics and the shipper's decision on whether or not the material meets a definition of hazardous materials in the regulations. So in other words, you as the driver cannot determine that a material is necessarily hazardous material. Although we as drivers are responsible and the final responsibility falls on us, you cannot necessarily say that this material is hazardous. If you think it is and it should be marked and it's labeled and it's not, then you can ask the carrier or the shipper, depending on where you are um, in your relationship with those individuals. You can ask them, shouldn't this be hazardous? But they may not necessarily agree. And at that point, you have to make a decision on if you're going to actually move a load that you believe to be hazardous or not. So do keep that in mind. The regulations require vehicles transporting certain types of quantities of hazardous materials to display diamond-shaped, square-on-point warning signs called placards. You must have a commercial driver's license with a hazardous materials endorsement before you can drive any size vehicle that is used to transport hazardous materials. Some locations require permits to be transport certain explosives or bulk hazardous waste. States and counties also may require drivers to follow special hazardous material routes. The federal government may require permits or exemptions for special hazardous material cargo, such as rocket fuel. In these next few sections, we will cover the intent of regulations, bulk tank loading, unloading, and marking, driver's responsibility, driving and parking rules, communication rules, emergencies, loading, and unloading. To communicate the risk, shippers must warn drivers and others about the materials hazards that they are carrying. The regulations require shippers to put hazard warning labels on packages, provide proper shipping papers, emergency response information, and placards. These steps are how the shipper is responsible for communicating to the driver as well as the courier. In order to get hazardous material endorsement on CDO, you must pass a written test about transporting hazardous materials. To pass the test, you must know how to identify what are hazardous materials, safely load shipments, properly placard your vehicle in accordance with the safety rules, and safely transport shipments. The regulations are intended to protect you, those around you, and the environment. Hazardous material means of substance or material that is determined capable of posing any unreasonable risk to health, safety, and property during transportation. CDLs with hazardous materials endorsements must be obtained before you can drive any size vehicle that is used to transport hazardous material. Who does what? First, let's talk about the shipper. The shipper sends products from one place to another by truck, rail, vessel, or airplane. The shipper must package, they must mark and label the materials. The shipper must also prepare shipping papers, provide emergency response information, and supply placards. The shipper must also certify on the shipping paper that the shipment has been prepared according to the rules. This is known as a shipper's certification. If in fact you are pulling cargo tanks supplied by you or your employer, you would not be required to have a shipper certification document. The carrier. The carrier takes shipment from shipper to its destination. The carrier checks the shippers correctly, check that the shipper correctly described, marked, labeled, and otherwise prepared the shipment for transportation. The carrier is to refuse improper shipments. And that would be if it's improperly labeled, if there's damage to the shipment, such as leaking. It could be various reasons why a carrier may have concerns about the load, but it is very important that they are not willing to haul or give the driver a load that will not be accepted. No one wants to haul a load and spend the money and the fuel and not in time and not have their load accepted because of an error that was on the shipper's part that the carrier should have caught. The carrier should also report accidents and incidents following hazardous materials to the proper government agency. The driver. The driver safely transports the shipment without delay. The driver makes sure the shipper has identified, marked, and labeled the hazardous materials properly. The driver refuses leaking packages and shipments. The driver will placard any vehicle that is required. The driver follows all special rules about transporting hazardous materials. The drivers must find out about permits, exemptions, and special routes for places you drive. In most cases, you can reach out to your dispatch for information about permits and exemptions, as well as special routes. Oftentimes, the carrier is already aware and will supply that information when he requests the load. States and counties require permits to transport hazardous materials or waste. They may limit the routes you can use. The driver also is responsible for keeping the hazmat shipping papers and emergency response information in the proper place. Shipping papers for hazardous materials must always be easily recognized. Other people must be able to find it quickly after a crash. Clearly distinguish hazardous materials shipping papers from others by tabbing them or keeping them on top of the stack of papers. When you are behind the wheel, keep shipping papers within the driver's reach with your seatbelt on, and a pouch, clear pouch, on the driver's seat, on the passenger seat or in the driver's door. When not behind the wheel, leave the shipping papers in the driver's door pouch or on the passenger seat. Emergency response information must be kept in the same location as the shipping papers. A materials hazard class reflects the risk associated with it. There are 9 different hazard classes. The types of materials included in these 9 classes are seen here. You have 9 classes, and then you have some classes that are broken up into divisions as well. You'll notice that it gets more specific. So here, 1 could be anything that explodes. So it has mass explosion, and then it gives you an example such as dynamite. And as you get to number 3, you see flammable liquids, and then it expands and gives you an example, which is gasoline. You're not required to memorize the whole table, but it is important that you are familiar, and you will become familiar over time based on hazard materials that you carry more often than others. But it is important that you can be familiar enough to know that you're placarded correctly, so that your shipping papers won't say one thing and your placards indicate your shipping papers say you're hauling flammable liquids, and then your placards say you're hauling poison. So you do need to be familiar enough to be able to make sure that everything is in order. Because the buck always falls on the driver, because that load is only carried out by you. And when DOT pulls you over, he only wants to hear what you've done and not necessarily what the shipper or the courier had to do with it. So be very careful and aware of how to protect yourself. Regulations require vehicles transporting certain types of or quantities of HM to display placards. Again, placards are diamond-shaped, square on point warning signs that must be displayed on all 4 sides of a motor vehicle. Here are some examples of hazmat placards. As you notice, some of them show explosion, which is an example of explosives, which looks like something like a firecracker or something blowing up. Here you have a flammable liquid, which has a fire on top. And then here, another one that's easily identified is poison, and we recognize the poison symbol. So some are more easily identified than others. Again, you're not expected to memorize them, but you should be familiar with them. Now at this time, please stop, pause this, and go to your email and open up the link for the video. Once you've completed the video, then resume the video with me. Thank you. There are 3 main lists used by shippers, carriers, and drivers. That is the hazardous material table, the list of hazardous substances and reportable quantities, and the list of marine pollutants. The hazardous material table. Okay, this is your hazardous material table. In column 1, you'll see it tells which shipping modes the entry affects and other information concerning the shipping description. The next 5 columns show division, identification number, packaging group, and required tables. So here in the first column, you could possibly see 6 different symbols. You may see a plus sign, which shows the proper shipping name, hazard class, and packaging group to use, even if the material doesn't meet the hazard class definition. You may see a letter A, which means the hazardous materials described in column 2 is subject to HMR only when offered to intended for transport by air unless it is a hazardous substance or hazardous waste. You may see the letter W, which means the hazardous material described in column 2 is subject to the HMR only when offered or intended for transportation by water. You may see the letter D, which means the proper shipping name is appropriate for describing the material for domestic transportation. You may see the letter I, which identifies a proper shipping name that is used to describe materials in international transportation, or the letter G, which means this hazardous material described in column 2 is generic shipping name. A generic shipping name must be accompanied by a technical name on the shipping paper. A technical name is specific chemical that makes the product hazardous. So basically, generic is no different than prescription medicine. So you may have ibuprofen, or you may have Motrin. So generic is basically the same as those. I have actually never hauled a generic load before, so I don't know that they're very common, but I do know that you can pull them, so you should be aware. Okay, so now let's look at column 2. Column 2 lists the proper shipping names and descriptions of regulated materials. Entries are in alphabetical order, so you can more quickly find the right entry. The table shows proper shipping names and the regular type. The shipping paper must show proper shipping names. The names shown in italics are not proper shipping names. Here we only have one name, but if there were multiple names, they would need to be, again, in alphabetical order. Now, in column 3, it shows a material, hazard, class, or division, or the entry forbidden. Never transport a forbidden material. Placard hazardous material shipments based on the quantity and hazard class. You can decide which placards to use if you know these 3 things: the material hazardous class, the amount being shipped, and the amount of the hazardous material of all classes on your vehicle. Again, material hazard class, amount being shipped, and amount of hazardous materials of all classes on your vehicle. And that is how you would determine which placard to use if you know these 3 things. In column 4, we will see the identification number for each proper shipping name. Identification numbers are preceded by the letters UN or NA. The letters NA are associated with the proper shipping names that are only used within the United States and Canada. The identification number must appear on the shipping paper as part of the shipping description and also appear on the package. Again, it must appear in both places, on the shipping description and on the package. It also must appear on the cargo tanks and other bulk packaging. Police and firefighters use this number to quickly identify the hazardous materials in case of an emergency. So here we see it's a UN and then 1841. So again, that UN means the letters are associated with proper shipping names. Okay. And column 5 shows the packaging group. You'll see these numbers in Roman numerals. So this one is the number 3, but it could be a V and a 1, which would be 6, or an X and a 1 and an X, which would be 9, but you will always only see them in Roman numerals. In column 6, it shows the hazard warning labels. Shippers must put on packages of hazardous materials. Some products require use or more than one label due to a dual hazard being present. In column 7, they show the list of additional provisions that apply to the material. When there is an entry in this column, you must refer to the federal regulations for specific information. The numbers 1 through 6 in this column mean the hazardous material is a poison inhalation hazard. That is PIH, poison inhalation hazard. PIH materials have special requirements for shipping papers, marking, and placards. Here we are in column 8. And column 8 is broken up into 3 parts. It shows the section numbers covering the packaging requirements for each hazardous material. Okay. List of hazardous substances and reportable quantities. Okay, so in this chart, we will use this chart, Appendix A. The DOT and EPA wants to know about spills of hazardous substances. So normally, if there is any type of spill, we have to determine if it's reportable or not. And that's where this chart comes in. They are named in the list of hazardous substances and reportable quantities. So reportable quantities you'll see is right here, and usually you'll see it as RQ. Okay, so column 3 of this list shows each product's reportable quantity. So when these materials are being transported in a reportable quantity or greater in one package, the shipper displays the letters RQ on the shipping paper and package. The letters RQ may appear before or after the description. You or your employer must report any spill of these materials which occurs in a reportable quantity. If the words inhalation hazard appears on the shipping paper or package, the rules require display of the poison inhalation hazard or poison gas placards as appropriate. These placards must be used in addition to the other placards which may be required by products hazard class. Always display the hazard class placard and the poison inhalation hazard placard, even for small amounts. Last is the marine pollutants. Please copy this link and you can pull up the table for marine pollutants later after this class. It is a large amount of information. And again, you're not expected to memorize any of these tables actually, but it is good to know and to be familiar with it. Okay, shipping papers. The shipping paper for hazardous materials must include a page number. So here we see our page number is 1 of 1, which is very uncommon. You usually have more than 1 page. But for this example, they show 1 of 1. Okay. If it was 1 of 4, you should make sure that you have all 4 pages. If it says 1 of 8, you should count each page and make sure you have every single page and that there's nothing missing. Okay. The proper description for each hazardous material. Okay, it has a shipper certification signed by the shipper saying that they have prepared the shipment according to the regulations. And here they don't show the page where they sign. They don't show a signature at all. So this shipper paper is not really an accurate example. But here's the description that I mentioned previously. And as you see, you're hauling more than one type of hazardous material. Okay. And as you see, there's your RQ that we discussed earlier. So it is what? A reportable quantity. So if there was a spill, you would need to report it. Okay. You also see that it's a cylinder. So you see the amount, the quantity of the cylinder. It'll always give you the to address and also the from address, which is very important, especially in cases of an emergency or accident, because they need to know where this hazardous material was coming from so they can narrow it down more as to exactly what you were hauling in the case that they don't have all the information. And then at the bottom, you'll also see that they have the special instructions, and they are to contact John Smith in this case. And again, he can be contacted 24 hours a day. Okay. If shipping paper describes both hazardous and non-hazardous products, the hazardous materials must be entered first. So in this case, it has an inhalation hazard. So it would be indicated first. There aren't any non-hazardous in this list, but they would be at the bottom. Okay. Highlighted in contrasting color or identified by an X placed before the shipping description would be the ID number, shipping name, hazard class, and packing group. Okay. And here's the order here, as we see. The basic description of hazardous materials includes the identification number, proper shipping name, hazard class or division, and the packaging group, if any in that order. The packaging group is displayed in Roman numerals may be preceded by a PG. Okay, so we don't have any Roman numerals here. Okay. As previously mentioned, some information can be on the shipping papers or some other documents that includes the basic description and technical name of the hazardous material. Or it may be in the guidance book, such as the Emergency Response Guidebook. Motor carriers may assist shippers by keeping an ERG on each vehicle carrying hazardous materials. The driver must provide the emergency response information to the federal, state, or local authorities responding to a hazardous material incident or investigating one. So, it is not required that the shipper or the carrier provide the driver with the emergency response guidebook. I always suggest that you have one that you carry maybe in your go bag or, at all times to make sure that you're compliant for one and that you have the information needed in cases of an emergency. So here is how the book looks. As you see, they come out every 4 years. So we are still currently on 2020, and it'll be good for another 2 years. The books only cost about $4, $4 or $5 to purchase from, you can buy it on Amazon or a bookstore, and it's definitely beneficial to have. So keep that in mind. Okay. Here is an example of how the total quantity and number and type of factors must appear before or after the basic description, the packaging tape, and the unit of measurement may be abbreviated. So here the quantity is most important. So we know this is important. This is the container, which is abbreviated, so 10 containers. And then you see the UN that was mentioned previously, and then the numbers following. Okay. And then we see also that it's 500 pounds, and pounds, of course, is abbreviated with the LBS so that there's no question about the amount of weight you're carrying, because remember, the amount of weight can determine also if you're actually hauling a load that is necessarily required to be placarded, right? So the weight definitely matters. Okay. Here we also see an example of the shipper. See another example. Here, the shipper of hazardous waste must put the word waste before the proper shipping name of the material on the shipping paper. So here you see the waste waste acetone is the hazardous waste. So it must be completely identified. Again, you have the UN and then the number behind it. You have the Roman numeral 2 there. So when shipping hazardous waste, the shipper must use a hazardous waste manifest. So in addition to your shipping papers, you must also have a you must also have a hazardous waste manifest as well. Okay. Now, a non-hazardous material may not be described by using a hazardous class or identification number. Shippers must keep a copy of the shipping papers or electronic image for a period of 2 years, 3 years for hazardous waste, after the material is accepted by initial carrier. If one provider provides a carrier service only and is not the originator of the shipment, a carrier is required to keep a copy of the shipping papers for a period of 1 year. These regulations can be viewed in the Federal Regulations Code, Title 49, Parts 100 to 185. Shipper certification. We mentioned this previously, that the shipper is responsible for shipper certification. When the shipper packages hazardous materials, he or she certifies that the package has been prepared according to the rules. The signed shipper certification appears on the original shipping paper. The only exceptions are when a shipper is a private carrier transporting their own product and when the package is provided by the carrier. Unless a package is clearly unsafe or does not comply with the HMR, you may accept the shipper's certification in that case. Concerning proper packaging, some carriers have additional rules about transporting hazardous materials. Follow up with your employer about the individual rules for your company. Okay, so packaging labels, markings. Okay. Shipper's print requires markings directly on the packaging, an attached label or tag. An important package marking is the name of the hazardous material. It is the same name as the one on the shipping papers. The requirements for marking vary by package size and material being transported. When required, the shipper will put the following on the package. They will put the name and address of the shipper and consignee, the hazardous materials, shipping name, and identification number, the labels required. Recognizing hazardous materials. Okay. Learn to recognize shipments of hazardous materials. To find out the shipment includes hazardous materials, look at the shipping paper. Does it have an entry with the proper shipping name, a hazard class, an identification number, a highlighted entry, or one with an X or RQ in the hazardous materials column? Other clues suggesting hazardous materials. What business is the shipper in? In other words, if you're showing up to a fertilizer plant and you don't have a hazardous material marking, then they may be making a mistake or misleading you. So you need to be familiar. If you show up to a pest control or agricultural supplier, more than likely you should be hauling something that says hazardous materials. So be very mindful of that information. And again, remember when hauling waste that you have to have the hazardous waste manifest along with the actual shipping papers. So these are all things that as a driver you should be aware of and paying attention to. Placarding. At least 3 inches away from any other markings, your placards must be kept clear of attachments or devices such as ladders, doors, and tarpaulins. Your placards must be kept clean, undamaged, so the color, format, and message are easily seen. They must be affixed to a background of contrasting color. The use of drive safely and other slogans are not permitted. The front placards may be on the front of the tractor or the front of the trailer. To decide which placards to use, you need to know the hazard class of the materials, the amount of hazardous materials shipped, and the total weight of all classes of hazardous materials in your vehicle. There are two placarded tables, Table 1 and Table 2. Table 1 materials must be placarded when any amount is transported. So no matter how little or small of an amount of mass explosives you have, which is 1.1, you must be placarded, okay? Table 2 gives us examples of hazardous materials that only if the total amount transported is more than 1,001 pounds are required to be placarded. Now, so for example, if you had 500 pounds of 1.5, which is very insensitive, hazardous material, and let's say you also had 4,300 pounds of 4.1 flammable solids, that's only equal to 800 pounds. So there would be no need for a placard in that case, right? Again, the total must equal to 1,001 pounds or more. Bulk packaging. Bulk packaging is a single container with a capacity of 119 gallons or more. A bulk package and a vehicle transporting a bulk package must be placarded even if it only has the residue of a hazardous material. So not a small amount, not just 500 pounds or 300 pounds, but a residue, any residue of the hazardous material. Certain bulk packages only have to be placarded on two opposite sides or maybe display labels. All other bulk packages must be placarded on all four sides. Please take a moment now and view video number 2. Again, you can find the link in your email. Please answer the following below and send your responses via email.